Hey, it's Mike Hambright with FlipNerd.com. Welcome back for another exciting VIP interview where I interview some of the most successful real estate investing experts and entrepreneurs in the industry to help you learn and grow. Today, I'm joined by attorney Garrett Sutton, who's a wealth of information on asset protection. Now, Mr. Sutton is a best-selling author. In fact, he's one of Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad advisors, and he's the founder of Corporate Direct, which helps assist entrepreneurs and investors in protecting their assets. Today, we're going to discuss real estate asset protection from one of the premier authorities in the country. But before we get started, let's take a moment to recognize our featured sponsors. RealtyMogul.com is an online marketplace for real estate investing, connecting borrowers and capital from accredited and institutional investors. Get a rehab loan fast and close in as little as 10 days. Rates start as low as 9%. We'd also like to thank National Real Estate Insurance Group, the nation's leading provider of insurance to the residential real estate investor market. From individual properties to large-scale investors, National Real Estate Insurance Group is ready to serve you. Please note, the views and opinions expressed by the individuals in this program do not necessarily reflect those of FlipNerd.com or any of its partners, advertisers, or affiliates. Please consult professionals before making any investment or tax decisions, as real estate investing can be risky. Mr. Sutton, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Glad you're here. So, what's interesting is, for me, and this is one of the things that you don't really realize until you've been a real estate investor for a while, is you're just so focused on getting started and making money that sometimes people overlook getting their entities set up right, or maybe entities at all. They may be operating as a sole proprietor with no entity. And then after you kind of build your empire or start to build things up, then you may get hit with a lawsuit or something. And usually when you realize that you're not protected is when it's too late often. So I'm excited to talk about this topic today. And it's actually something that's impacted me, for sure over the years. Just things happen and you start to question whether you're structured right and whether if something happens to me, is my family protected and all those things. But before we kind of get into that, why don't you talk a little bit about your background? A lot of folks have read your book, but they may have not heard you speak directly. But just kind of share a little bit of information about you.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. Again, thanks for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here.
Glad you're here.
My name's Garrett Sutton. I am an attorney here in Reno, Nevada. I grew up in the Bay Area and went to the University of California at Berkeley, and then across the Bay to Hastings Law School, which is the University of California's law school in San Francisco. And I practiced law in the Bay Area, and I just kind of got tired of the crowds there. And so I moved up to Reno. I'd always spent my summers at Lake Tahoe, and I wanted to be near Lake Tahoe and the skiing and the hiking. So I moved up here in 1989, and it's been great living here. And I was very fortunate to become associated with Robert Kiyosaki and became one of the Rich Dad advisors, and have written 6 books in the Rich Dad Advisor series. And I really enjoy going around the country and talking to investors about how to protect your real estate. Because as you say, Mike, when you get started, you're so intent on getting title to that property, getting the loan in place, getting tenants. And a lot of people forget that they have to protect the asset as well.
Right.
I had a lady come up to me in San Francisco. I was giving a talk. And she said, I'm just buying a duplex and I'd like to use an LLC to protect it. I said, that's a great idea. In California, the annual fee for an LLC is $800 a year.
Oh, wow.
And she said, oh my gosh, I can't afford that. And I go, well, it's your choice. And I was giving another speech in San Francisco a year later, and she came up to me and said, I'm getting sued by a tenant. I'd like to set up that LLC now. Well, at that point, it's too late.
Yeah.
If it's in your name and the tenant sues you, you are personally responsible for everything that happens. So it's important to understand that you really need to take affirmative steps now. You need to set it up now.
Right.
So,
and can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, how it came to be that you focus on this area? How did you pick this expertise? Of all the exciting legal fields you could have chosen.
Right, I could have done dog-catcher law. I really enjoyed corporations. When I went to law school, I just found myself attracted to corporate law. And then I grew up in Oakland, and my dad was a judge, and he would tell me stories at the dinner table about how people didn't protect their assets. You know, someone came into court and they were a general partner. They had operated as a sole proprietor when they could have easily set up an entity. And I just remember those stories as a kid, how people didn't engage in asset protection. So that was another reason why I went into this area. I just enjoy helping people protect their assets.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I know that, you know, there's a lot of discussion over forming legal entities in different states, irregardless of where you live. Can you just kind of give some general advice on how important that really is and why people consider forming entities in states other than the state where they live in?
Well, you raise a very good point. If you have property in the state of Arizona, you know, you would consider setting up an Arizona LLC for that property. Arizona's law is good. It's not the strongest. So as a second phase, you may have the Arizona LLC owned by a Wyoming or Nevada LLC. Those are the two strongest state laws in the country for LLCs. And so you have one or more Arizona, Colorado, Utah, whatever LLCs, all owned by one Wyoming LLC. Wyoming offers the best asset protection, and now it has two advantages over Nevada. It's a little less expensive on an annual basis than Nevada, and they don't list your name on the internet. So you have more privacy with Wyoming than you have with Nevada. So a lot of our clients, we will use that strategy. You're going to have an LLC in the state where the property is located because you're doing business there. You're collecting rents there. You need to be qualified or you know, seen to be doing business in that state. But that next entity down should be a Wyoming or Nevada LLC for the better asset protection. If you get sued in a car wreck and someone wants to get at the Arizona property, they have to fight through the Wyoming LLC to even get at Arizona. And under Wyoming law, it's going to be very difficult for them to get through Wyoming to Arizona.
Right, right. And I don't ask this next question to say that anybody should shirk responsibility. I mean, you need to be a responsible business owner for sure. But from somebody that's had some frivolous lawsuits against them, that just kind of the realization that anybody can sue anybody, no matter how ridiculous it is. How important is having an entity in another state of yours to not just for stronger laws, but just to make it a little more complicated for folks to track you down or to file that suit, or you know how much of a role is the complexity in not having breadcrumbs directly to your own front door?
See, I like putting up as many real or perceived roadblocks as possible.
Yeah.
All right. So if someone is coming after you and they see that your property's in an LLC, that's going to be a deterrent. Now, if they come to understand that your properties in Arizona are eventually held by a Wyoming LLC and they're going to have to hire an attorney in Wyoming, that's an even bigger deterrent.
Right.
So I want to set up as many deterrents as possible. And I think that's everybody's asset protection strategy. Now, when we're talking about entities, we shouldn't forget the importance of insurance.
Oh, absolutely.
You're always going to have insurance. When I'm setting up entities, I always tell people insurance is the first line of defense.
Yeah.
Right? The attorneys know how to get after the insurance.
Right.
Right? That's kind of the pot of red meat that they know how to get after.
Right.
But the entities then are the second line of defense, and a lot of attorneys don't know how to get through these entities. So it is, again, another deterrent.
Yeah. Well, if you consider that a lot of folks, at least in my case, they were probably hiring somebody on contingency. And so the more complicated you make it for that attorney, the less likely they're willing to accept it on contingency, and the less likely that person is to have money out of pocket just to get past that initial phase of discovery or whatever. So
a contingency fee whereby an attorney is going to take a percentage of what's collected. Let's say they're going to get a third. You don't have to pay anything during the time that they're suing.
Right.
But when the attorney wins, he or she gets to keep a third of the action. An attorney is less likely to take a contingency case when they're going to have to hire another attorney in Wyoming. They're Wyoming charging order says all they get is a right to distributions. Now you have an attorney who's sitting around waiting to get paid.
Right.
That's not in the attorney's economic interest.
Right.
So these LLCs are a deterrent for contingency fee attorneys.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of general advice that you give people, I mean, one of the most common questions that I'm asked is, and I usually tell people I'm not an attorney and you should talk to one, but in terms of what type of legal entity to set up, there's so many different flavors out there, and there are pros and cons of several different ones, and there's some that obviously you should probably stay away from completely. But there's probably not a one-size-fits-all answer to that question, but just maybe kind of help us understand what people should really be looking at and what they should consider when they're thinking of setting up a legal entity.
Right. So we have a couple different entities to choose from. We have corporations, be they S corporations, which have flow-through taxation, or C corporations, which are double taxation. We have LLCs, which stands for limited liability companies, and we have limited partnerships, which are called LPs. And typically, you're going to use, for real estate, either an LLC or an LP. And in that case, you have, depending on the state you're in, the better asset protection. The corporations don't have the same level of asset protection as an LLC or an LP does. There's only one state that gives the charging order asset protection to corporate shares, and that's Nevada. But the taxation of the corporation is not as friendly for real estate as the partnership taxation of an LLC and an LP. So to shortly answer your question, Mike, you're going to use either an LLC or an LP for real estate.
Okay. And does that start to differ? Is it a different answer if you have a partner that's not a family member or spouse versus somebody that does, for example? Or what are some criteria that you start to look at that say, my answer is different if this is the case?
All right, well, they're both good entities, the LLC and the LP. The LP requires you to set up two entities because you need a general partner and a limited partner. So, you set up a corporation or an LLC to be the general partner. So the LP requires two entities. So for that reason alone, a lot of people just like the LLC. The one advantage of the LP is the general partner has absolute control. So the general partner can own as little as 2%, but have absolute control over it. So when you're bringing partners in and you want to make sure that they don't come and try and influence management, the LP may be the way to go. So we have two good entities, but if you're interested in control as a syndicator or a real estate investment company, you might favor, even though it requires two entities, you might favor the limited partnership over the LLC.
Okay. And how about I don't know that all states have these yet, but something that I'm hearing more and more about. In fact, I've actually been an owner of one in the past. Is a series LLC, specifically for real estate investors, where the concept is you don't have to form a new legal entity. You just write it into your operating agreement that effectively you have a new series in that LLC. Yeah. I mean, what are you're kind of grinning.
I'm not a big fan of the series LLC, and I write about it in this great book called Loopholes of Real Estate.
Right.
We talk about the series LLC, and they're not proven yet. There are no court cases on them. I think about 14 states have approved them, but I just like the certainty of a court saying, yes, we're going to allow these buckets or series to be protected from each other. I think it's safer to set up individual LLCs right off the bat.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, the typical reason that people are setting up multiple entities is to prevent kind of piercing that corporate veil, right? And I just, even though I owned one, I never really understood. They typically require you to put something in the name like Series 1, Series 2. It's like, well, if it says series, people know that there must be other assets out there.
Right.
So, that's like the ultimate breadcrumb is, hey, there's more of us here. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
Well, and it was interesting, Mike, because the promoters went around California saying it's $800 per year per entity. And if you've got 10 LLCs, that's $8,000 a year. Well, let's just set up one series LLC
Right.
and have 10 properties in each series, separate series. Well, the state of California, you got to give them credit.
Yeah.
At least they're consistent. They said each series is $800.
Oh, wow.
So they were able to collect the $8,000 anyway.
Wow.
But see, we don't have a lot of certainty with the Series LLC. And until we do, I just don't like my clients to be pioneers. I don't want them to find out the hard way that some court says we're not going to give asset protection to all the separate series within a Series LLC.
Yeah. And so talk a little bit about what the consideration that people should make when they're setting up a new entity, because they could, presumably go to 50 different states and do that, irregardless of where they live. What are some of the general guidelines that you tell people to consider their own state versus a Nevada or New Hampshire or somewhere else that?
Well, my strategy is if you're going to have a property in New Hampshire, you would form a New Hampshire LLC because you're doing business there. If you get sued over the property, New Hampshire law applies. I like having then the New Hampshire LLC or Utah or Arizona, as we mentioned before, owned by a Wyoming. And Wyoming offers the best asset protection out there. And it's only $50 a year for a Wyoming LLC. And so it's pretty inexpensive to once you've set up the LLC, to have it there in Wyoming. And we have an office in Jackson Hole. You can come visit if you want.
Yeah.
We have an office in Jackson Hole to be the resident agent, and that's $125 a year. So for $175 a year, you have that extra protection of Wyoming. You kind of look at it like an insurance policy. It's just another form of insurance.
Mm-hmm. And I know you don't advise on, you're not a tax advisor, but are there complications that changes from a tax standpoint when different state entities own different?
Well, you're going to pay if your state has a tax, like Arizona has a tax, you would pay the Arizona tax on income generated through that LLC.
Right.
But if the Arizona is a single member, meaning one owner, it's owned by the Wyoming, you don't have to file an Arizona federal return. It all flows through to the Wyoming. There's no state tax in Wyoming, so you don't have a state tax return. And then you just file the one federal return. So say, for example, you had 3 LLCs, one in Arizona, one in New Hampshire, and one in Utah, all owned by the one Wyoming LLC. You don't have to file one federal return.
Okay.
So that makes it pretty easy on taxation.
Okay. And can you give some guidance or advice in terms of the number, for rentals specifically, the number of properties that you advise people to put into one legal entity? I've heard all over the board, and I know it.
I don't have a rule of thumb. I think it's just what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, some people say, well, you should never put 3 or more properties in one LLC. Well, if you're in a state like California where they're charging $800 per LLC, maybe that changes.
Right.
Some people do it by a dollar limit. I talk to my clients. We get on the phone and just chat about what their comfort level is. I think that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. And when you say comfort level, you're talking about risk tolerance specifically?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So what is
the
real
issue being, if you have 20 properties in one LLC and you get sued by a tenant at one property, they can get the equity in all 20. So do we have 4 separate LLCs with 5 properties each?
Right.
Do we have two LLCs with 10 properties each? That's really what your judgment call and what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, which then causes a lot of grief from an accounting standpoint, you have to have multiple bank accounts. I mean, we've gone that route. We've had them in multiple entities. We've merged them to one from an accounting standpoint. I mean, talk about, I don't personally know anybody that has ever been sued that lost a case and then somebody was able to take all their other properties. I mean, conceivably, I understand how that could happen, and I'm sure you have some experiences, but kind of talk about the real risk that is there. I mean, of course, it depends on the state that you're in, too.
So we had a client that had 5 properties in their individual name, all right? Okay. And so a tenant sued over one property. It was a horrendous accident. The insurance didn't adequately cover the claim. And because he had 5 properties in his individual name, the tenant was able to go after the equity in all 5. Now, that would be the same case if the tenant sued and all 5 properties were in one LLC.
Right.
The tenant could get the equity in all 5. However, say we had 2 LLCs and we had 2 properties in one and 3 in the other, and the tenant sued over the LLC that had the 2 properties. They could get the equity in the 2 properties, but they're not able to get the equity in the other 3 because it's in a separate LLC. Their claim is against the first LLC, and they have no claim against the second one. So that's kind of how that works. Again, it's a judgment call.
Yeah. And so basically a court would require that entity to liquidate its assets to try to pay the claim. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
If insurance doesn't cover
But
it.
from a structure standpoint, no court would ever say, what other legal entities do you have that we might be able to liquidate? You're protected in that regard.
Correct. When the tenant sues over something that happened on the property. That's correct.
And then if a tenant conceptually were to go and sue that other entity too, to try to get more assets, they would really have no.
They rented from the first entity.
Right.
They don't have a contract with the second entity. Now, it changes when we have a car wreck, right? The car wreck action has nothing to do with the real estate. They hit you, Mike, and they're suing you personally.
Right.
And they'd like to get at the real estate in these 2 LLCs. Well, if we have the Wyoming LLC blocking those 2, it's going to be tough for them to get at those properties because Wyoming or Nevada just offers the charging order.
Sure.
And
I suppose that would be different if there's a lot of real estate investors that have marketing on their vehicle, so which is basically a billboard to, hey, if you get an accident with this vehicle, you may have a company to go after. So I guess that maybe changes in that regard. If somebody had a wrapped vehicle or a magnet on their door that said, hey, I'm with this legal entity, the investor's doing it so they can write a portion of their vehicle off through their company because they're using it for company use. I mean, that probably opens the gateway to that, right?
Yeah, my clients in that situation will have an entity for marketing, right?
Okay.
It's just an entity that's out there that does the marketing. And then they'll have a separate LLC, one or more, to hold the real estate. So we kind of split up the marketing activities from the holding real estate activities. Because you're absolutely right. In that situation you described, car wreck could lead someone to be able to get at the fourplex.
Yeah. Because in my experience, not just my experience, but just, it seems like the typical thing that happens is just sue everybody and then let the dust settle where it may. So.
Right. And it's too late once you've been sued. So it's best, as we said at the top of the show, it's best to set these entities up now, right as you get started, to start protecting yourself.
Right. So, can you talk a little bit about where you think things are going litigiously in terms of where the country is going and where different states are going? Of course, it depends on the economy, but what are some changes that real estate investors should anticipate or should at least be trying to watch around the corner to see if they change things that could impact them?
Well, we live in the most litigious society on earth, and that's not going to change.
Right.
Attorneys are well rewarded for bringing litigation. You and I aren't going to change that system. So knowing that, we need to protect ourselves right from the start. I don't see the system changing, and in many ways, the system is fine. I mean, it allows people to go to court to redress their claims. Instead of people shooting each other in the street, you go to court, right? It's a civil way to go. With that comes frivolous litigation. You do have attorneys and people out there that, play games with the system. They try and game the system. And while I don't think we're going to change the system, you just have to know that those people, those predators are out there, and you have to protect yourself accordingly.
Right. Yeah, and my biggest learning experience, or one of my bigger learning experiences over the past several years as a real estate investor, has unfortunately been in a couple of very frivolous lawsuits that, in my heart, knew that we did nothing wrong. just that you could be sued by anybody. I think folks just need to, if you haven't been through that experience, you need to understand that even if you are structured completely right and nobody could possibly ever win, that doesn't mean that you will win. I mean, there's the time that you have to deal with these things. There's the lost sleep, and just these things tend to be drawn out over the course of, years in many instances. And so, but it's even worse if you're not set up properly to protect yourself, for sure.
Right. And, Mike, I do not offer a 100% bulletproof guarantee. You can't offer that.
Right.
So knowing that, you do the best you can. But like you say, if you get into litigation, it is stressful, it is expensive, it is time consuming. And, if you can avoid it, you certainly should.
Right.
And so I always recommend that people have adequate insurance. I think having an umbrella policy tied to your home and auto is a good thing. And in most states, you can get an extra $1 million in coverage for $400 a year. I think that umbrella policy is a good investment. And then the second line of defense, as we've discussed, are these entities.
Yeah.
Right? People are going to be less likely to sue you if you hold your real estate and other assets in entities. So, for example, you could have a couple entities to hold real estate, and then if you have a big brokerage account, I would suggest having a separate LLC to hold the brokerage account, because if that brokerage account is in your name and there's $1 million in it, someone could go straight after that account if you get sued. So let's put that into a Wyoming LLC as well.
Yeah. One other, I don't know how you feel on this, one of the pieces of advice that I often give people, just based on my personal experiences, we're well insured, but what we tended to be, what we've been sued on in the past was fraud. We didn't disclose something on the seller's disclosure that we should have that was completely false, but nonetheless, my insurance, my general liability, other things didn't cover fraud, and at least in my state where I'm at, they generally always sue for fraud, because if they're able to win, they're able to potentially get triple damages. So they always throw the fraud thing in. And so one of the pieces of advice that I often give people is to look into getting a errors and omissions policy or some sort of E&O policy that protects you from fraud, because a general liability policy is not going to do that.
Well, and you raise a good point. As you get into real estate, you're going to have a team. And I think one of the important team members is your insurance broker.
Yeah.
Right? And you should sit down with him or her and say, this is what I'm doing. Let's do a risk analysis here. And you're absolutely right. The fraud claims come, and they know that insurance doesn't cover that.
Right.
And so to have a policy, an E&O policy, D&O, that will protect you makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Garrett, I know that your firm, Corporate Direct, offers a lot of services to folks that are setting up new entities. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and why folks might be interested in working with you?
Sure. We offer very affordable asset protection. We offer consults. You can get on the phone with me, and usually in 15 minutes, we can come up with a strategy. If you know what you want, you need a Texas LLC, you can get on the phone with one of our account reps, and we'd be happy to talk to you. We charge a flat fee of $695, and that includes everything. But if you mention your group, we'd be happy to offer a $100 discount.
Oh, fantastic!
And people will say, well, I can go to LegalZoom and get that for $129, and there really is a difference between what we do and what LegalZoom does.
Sure.
So it's just what level of service do you want?
Right.
But we're happy to talk to people, come up with the best strategy for their in-state activities for Wyoming or Nevada. And we do it for all 50 states. We handle a lot of foreign investors who are coming to the United States, investing. We work with their CPA back home or their CPA here in the United States, and we get the right strategy together, because not every strategy fits every situation.
Right.
Get the right strategy for the client, and then our goal is to make it very easy on an ongoing basis. You don't pay the $695 every year. You just pay the resident agent fee of $125. And if you want us to prepare the minutes so that your veil doesn't get pierced, we can do that. So we provide the full range of services for your asset protection needs.
Great, great. Well, we definitely appreciate your time and all the knowledge you've shared today. Appreciate you being on the show.
Well, it's my pleasure, and good luck to all your investors. I've watched a couple of your shows, Mike. They're great.
Thank you.
You're providing a lot of information to people, and that's good. People need this kind of information, so thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you. And so for those that are listening, we'll add a link to your company website down below. And as Mr. Sutton mentioned, if you mention that you're interested in setting up an entity and you mention Flip Nerd, he'll knock $100 off. So that's fantastic. Thank you for adding that.
Sure, my pleasure.
Well, please stay in touch, and I may personally be reaching out to you for some advice here.
Good.
So thanks so much for joining us today.
Sure, my pleasure.
Okay, have a great day. Are you a member of FlipNerd.com, the most robust real estate investing platform in existence, where you can find off-market wholesale deals and great vendors literally in your market? You can get access to advice from experts and learn about local clubs and events right in your backyard. If not, please visit FlipNerd.com and register for a free account. You can register in less than a minute. It's pretty much the coolest site that's ever existed in the real estate investing industry, so get on over to FlipNerd.com.